Okay, it is 10 a.m. sharp here on the West Coast, 1 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States. So let's go ahead and get started right on time, and we'll definitely be ending on time or a little bit early too. So welcome to the PapayaHead.com presentation, Solving the Dinner Problem. Thanks for showing up to all the attendees, and we're going to talk about healthy dinners, right? It happens every night. Dinner time comes around, and how we can get a healthy dinner on the table even when there's no time, you're out of ideas, and you're serving picky eaters. So again, thanks for showing up. So let's go ahead and get it started. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Shelly Najjar. And we got to know Shelly back several years ago. When we first developed PapayaHead, part of what we did, our technology, we based it on a nutrition density algorithm that was created by Dr. Adam Drunowski from the University of Washington. And he was really intrigued by what we were doing, and he invited us to come present our technology and our company to one of his classes at the UW. And Shelly was a student there at that time, and we met her. And she stood out in our minds because she asked the hardest questions of all as we were presenting. But she stayed in touch with us, and we ended up forming a relationship, and she works with us and consults with us here at PapayaHead. So Shelly has impressed us for a long time. She's a registered dietitian. She has a master's of public health and public health nutrition, and her passion is helping people reach their goals through process and action, whether that's nutrition and eating or in other areas of life. She's a bucket list person and a travel blogger, and she's knocking out her bucket list already. And there's a picture of her at the Grand Canyon on a 3-week road trip last year, knocking out some of her bucket list items. So again, we're really fortunate to have her here. She's done a phenomenal job at gathering this information and putting it into a really concise, actionable set of information for you to use. So without any further introduction, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Shelly. So go ahead and take it away, Shelly.
Thanks, Dean. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're talking about solving that healthy dinner problem, eating healthy even when there's no time, when you're out of ideas, and when you're serving picky eaters. I'm Shelly, and we are presenting from PapayaHead, Inc. And thanks to everybody who said, where you're from. I'm here from Seattle, calling in from Seattle, and it is in that Pacific Northwest, and we have a really nice day. So we know that these are big barriers to eating healthy, so I've asked fellow dietitians to share their tips for success in these 3 areas, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, is their tips on these challenges. So who is this for? This is for anybody who wants to eat healthy but needs some strategies for those real-life moments, or for people who already eat healthy but are thinking ahead to when things might get a little bit more challenging or difficult. And I am assuming that you have either direct control over what you eat yourself, or that you have significant influence in making those food decisions in your household. So every time we're talking about health, we do need to include this little disclaimer. The information in this presentation is for educational purposes only, and it's not a substitute for professional medical advice or emergency treatment. So if you are experiencing a problem or would you like specific information on your nutrition, then please contact your medical team. This webinar presented today is by PapayaHead, Inc., and so they are the sponsor of this presentation. So as Dean said, I'm going to be talking about the 3 barriers, well, 3 of the barriers to healthy eating. There are more, but these are the top 3 that we've picked for today. And we're talking again specifically about picky eaters, not having enough time, and lack of new ideas. And we all have those moments where we just don't know what to make, like you just can't think of something new to make. You're tired of eating the same thing over and over. Or you have other days where maybe you have tons of great ideas and you really have the motivation to eat healthy, but you're so busy that it just doesn't come together. Or maybe your situation is just that you can make whatever you want. You can have all the motivation you want and all the time in the world, but the people who you're serving just won't eat anything. So let's get started. We'll go first through the picky eaters, and then maybe as I go through some of these tips, people can say, oh, that's a good one. So as I said, I'll be sharing what other dietitians have said and what their advice is to you. And all the full quotes, because I'll be excerpting, so all the full quotes are going to be available in a handout later, and Dean can explain more about that later on after the presentation. So for picky eaters, the first tip is to divide that responsibility of feeding and eating. Kristen Harris, a nutrition therapist at Creating Peace with Food, says the way to feed children from newborns through adolescence, and including picky eaters, is by using an appropriate division of responsibility, a term coined by Eileen Satter. This way of feeding helps develop eating competence. Now, division of responsibility means that you're responsible for offering the healthy foods, and your child or whoever else is eating with you is responsible for eating it and deciding if they like it. So your responsibility ends when you provide the food. And for a lot of people, that's a really big burden lifted off of them because they don't have to force anyone to like something. And if you are having trouble thinking what this would look like, imagine yourself at a restaurant and the waiter brings out the food, and then instead of just saying, enjoy your meal, or I hope you have, I hope you have a nice dining experience, they say, you have to finish everything on your plate and you cannot leave until you like it, until you're forced to like this food. That just doesn't make sense, right? Nobody would expect that to happen. So the responsibility on you is just to provide those healthy options, and the responsibility of every individual is to decide on their own whether they like a food or not. And I understand that this can still be frustrating because there are some days when it doesn't matter how many options you provide, it's still going to be a struggle. It's still going to be very frustrating. And that's when the next tip comes in. And that is to not give up. Jenny Chu, a registered dietitian nutritionist at jlchu.com, tells us, remember that each person's experience with food is unique. A child might not like the food this time, but do not be afraid to offer it. It may take 10 or 15 or more exposures to a food before it's accepted or not. There are no known negative nutritional implications of picky eating or food jags, but food battles can spoil the nurturing experience of mealtime. And again, we're talking about anybody who's eating, not just children. So don't get discouraged, just keep trying. And if you do want some outside support, there are dietitians who specialize in child nutrition if you're a picky eater as a child, or regular adult wellness and nutrition. And they can be a really good help to getting through this time because it can be quite challenging, and we do acknowledge that. So another thing that might help is to get kids involved in that process of cooking and preparing that food. And again, like I said, it's kids or adults or whoever. So Christine Sterparo says, and she's a dietitian at Pacific Medical Centers, she says, cooking can be a family activity that provides quality time together. Ask kids to pick out new recipes to try and batch cook them together over the weekend. And getting others involved helps give them some familiarity with the food that will be served and builds excitement about dinner. And you can also use this as a really good opportunity to teach about your culture and your family and the foods that you like and that are important to you. And then further, this familiarity idea, it doesn't just help in the kitchen, it can also help at the table. Mary Purdy, host of Mary's Nutritional Show on YouTube, shares this tip. Always be sure to pair the unfamiliar with the familiar so that the picky eater doesn't feel completely sideswiped by something he or she doesn't recognize. Additionally, just having that new food on the table nearby so the picky eater can see it but not be forced to eat it makes it much less unfamiliar when it finally arrives on their plate. Again, it's going back to that division of responsibility. The cook is responsible to provide the food, and the eater is responsible to decide whether they like it. And then we're talking about healthy eating, so of course we're talking about portion size, which is great for everybody. Portion size and eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're not. Those are pretty common topics when talking about health. But especially so when you're talking about people whose stomachs are a little bit smaller, or maybe who can't communicate the fact that they're hungry or not hungry, like maybe they haven't quite figured that out yet. So Peggy Cordy, author of Little Hands in the Kitchen, gives us plenty of tips from her book around helping kids to be hungry at meals and to not get overwhelmed. Some of her tips are to serve beverages 1 to 1.5 hours before meals so that you don't fill up on liquids, limit snacks if there's a poor appetite at meals, limiting sugar as it decreases appetite, and providing smaller, more manageable portions. And again, that's good tips for everybody, not just kids. So anybody eating. And when you think about this, our stomachs are about the size of our fist. So, and that's like any size adult. So if a kid makes a fist, that's how big their stomach is. And if you make a fist, that's how big your stomach is, approximately. So if you look at the size of the food you're serving, the size of the portions you're giving to people, is that an intimidating portion size for somebody with a smaller stomach? It's good to remember, if you're having trouble thinking about this, it's good to remember how you would feel if you were presented with an entire platter of food of something that you've never seen before, and the expectation is that you try it, rather than just having one bite presented to you so that you can try it just a little bit at a time. So would the portion that you're serving to somebody feel like that full platter? Just thinking about those smaller portions, more manageable, especially when you're trying a new food. You don't want to try the whole thing. So just keeping that in mind. And then lastly, in this section, we're going to tie it together in a very practical way with a tip from Sandy Nissenberg, author of multiple family and kids cookbooks. And she suggests to give kids a day of the week to choose the main dish and to help prepare it. If they choose macaroni and cheese, yes, it can be healthy if it's part of a balanced diet. So if they choose macaroni and cheese, let them stir it up, add the pasta, etc. And then you add a fresh vegetable like broccoli or green beans and some fresh cut up fruit, and you'll have a balanced meal. If mac and cheese isn't your adult preference, prepare crab cakes or salmon patties on the side, and there will be lots of choices to go around. And so that's really the thing is, right, is like focusing on that balanced meal. So you can incorporate regular foods or even like quote unquote junk foods as long as you're incorporating other foods along with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. But having that Kids' Choice Day where they get to have some responsibilities involved and get their opinion in there is a helpful tip. So hopefully some of these tips from the dietitians we interviewed will help you make progress with your picky eaters. And if you do have questions, again, you can leave those in the question box, or if you have a tip that worked particularly well, put it in the chat box, and they'll go straight over to us to see that. And then again, all the quotes are in the handouts if you want to refer to them later. So next we're going to move on to the challenge of not having enough time. And the first tip in this section is going to be stock your kitchen with healthy staples. And this is a great way to always have food on hand to make healthy meals. Trina Robertson, the project manager with the Dairy Council of California, expands on this tip with part of her quote. She says, keep foods from the 5 food groups in the kitchen. Adding meal staples to your shopping list makes it easier to create quick meals on busy nights. Make sure your pantry, cupboards, refrigerator, and freezer are stocked with healthy foods from all of the food groups like milk, cheese, tomatoes, garlic, onions, apples, bananas, bread, cereal, pasta, rice, tortillas, beans, etc. And actually, we have a resource that Dean will talk more about at the end that will help you with this tip. So be sure to stick around to find out more about that. And then one more thing to note is that while fresh foods are great and healthy, your meals don't always have to be made completely from scratch. And that's when the next tip comes in, which is to mix prepared and fresh foods so that you save more time. Jill Weisenberger, a Virginia-based author of The Overworked Person's Guide to Better Nutrition, says use a mix of prepared and fresh foods. For example, instead of relying on greasy takeout restaurants, do takeout from your local supermarket. Pick up a rotisserie chicken and serve it with a baked potato and a salad. Or shred it and mix it with your favorite jar of salsa and serve it over rice. And then she goes on to share another example, which is to keep individually wrapped frozen fish fillets on hand, because they defrost quickly in a pot of water and cook up quickly too. So one kind of like real-world example of this is Rachel Ray. Do you remember her? She made huge waves for her 30-minute meals show because she didn't only use fresh ingredients and everybody was up in arms that she was cheating. But this fact that she was using this mix of prepared and fresh foods was the thing that made her really popular because it was realistic. It's how most people are able to fit cooking into their lives. So that fact that prepared ingredients or foods are really helpful is a huge time saver. Frozen and prepared vegetables, for example, help cut down on the prep time and can contain as many or even more sometimes nutrients in the fresh versions. And it really doesn't have to be fresh as long as you focus on making that meal balanced. Another way to save time is to use those leftovers. And I'm not just talking about leftovers for dinner where you just open the refrigerator and eat everything. I'm talking about more creative use of leftovers. So Jill gave an example of how to use leftovers more creatively. She says to plan to cook only a couple of things each night for dinner. fill it in with planned leftovers. For example, make an extra big batch of roasted vegetables or quinoa for dinner on Monday and eat it again on Wednesday. And if you don't want to eat that same thing multiple times during the week, you can just mix in a new spice or a new sauce, and it will taste a little bit different. So all of these strategies, I know that it may require a little bit of flexibility on your part in terms of expectations of what dinner looks like or in terms of what healthy looks like. And if you are one of those people who's thinking like, oh, healthy dinner has to be, or like a dinner done right has to be a new, like a big fancy dinner, you know, set up, the whole family is like the typical Sunday dinner on those old TV shows where they all gathered around, it would be really helpful for you to remember this next tip, which is to relax. It doesn't need to be perfect. And this is especially helpful when you're busy. It's not that there's no space for those really nice meals and the big family gatherings, but when you're rushing around, it's probably not realistic. And I'm not talking about relaxing to the point where you just give up, but relaxing your expectations of what a healthy meal looks like is probably very helpful. Katrina Hoke, a Seattle-based dietitian, expands on this by saying, eating healthful, enjoyable food when you're busy sometimes entails changing your expectations and trying to avoid the goal of perfection. If you enjoy cooking with fresh ingredients, but you find that you're unable to do this when your schedule is packed, take a step back and remember that simple foods can be healthful and delicious. And she goes on to give some examples. One of these is that there might be some evenings when you combine canned beans and leftover rice and add jarred salsa and call it a day. And other evenings where you just eat a peanut butter sandwich you threw in your bag that morning and supplement it with an apple and yogurt. If you're a fan of food magazines, food blogs, and food television shows, you might have absorbed the idea that good food means elaborate preparation, but the modern world doesn't work that way. Most people don't have that kind of time. At this point, it's really good to understand your answer to the question, what is the most important thing to you regarding dinner? Is that getting everybody at the table at the same time, no matter what you're served? Is that serving a hot meal instead of a cold salad? Or is that just serving something fast and somewhat healthy that you don't have to think about? Whatever is that most important thing to you, understanding that and prioritizing it over perfection will go a long way in helping you figure out what strategies to use. So adding to this, having a list of fast dinner ideas for busy nights will also help. Having those foods that you know your family already likes takes a huge burden off. You're familiar with how to make it, and you don't have to think much about the ingredient proportions. And you've cooked it so many times, you know it's going to turn out right, and you can pretty much count on it being done on time. So Peggy says, when my boys played Little League, most parents would go to fast food places to grab dinner. We would always go home because I had my list of quick meals, such as pasta with marinara sauce, vegetable sticks or salad, and breadsticks dipped in the extra marinara sauce. Or I'd plan. I'd make meatballs, freeze them in dinner-sized quantity, and then all I had to do was take them out of the freezer, pour sauce, cover it with foil, and bake 20 to 30 minutes. And using that freezer is a really good idea for those extra leftovers if you want to batch cook. And batch cooking is just making a big quantity all at once for multiple meals. So you can make double of tonight's dinner and then save it in your refrigerator for this week or in your freezer for further in the future. And then to wrap this up, I'm going to share another trick that can be used in combination with a lot of these other tips, which is to use a cycle menu. And cycle menus are usually used in food service, but can actually be used at home too. And Sandy gives us some ideas on how to use this loosely. She says, creating a cycle menu, i.e. chicken on Mondays, tacos on Tuesdays, ground beef or turkey on Wednesdays, etc. Switch up the recipes and the sides, but at least you'll know what to purchase on the weekends, what to defrost in the morning, and what needs to be done at dinner time. Try to keep the recipe selection to 30 minutes or less too. And this strategy really takes a lot of the thinking out of the what's for dinner question, especially when you don't have a lot of time to plan meals. And you can use the other tips like adding leftover sides or mixing those prepared and fresh ingredients in that cycle structure. And of course, you're not locked into it. If you do want to decide to do something different, you just go ahead and do it. It's just there as a starting point like any meal plan, including PapayaHeads. But what it is helpful for, what any meal plan is helpful for, is to relieve some of that pressure around figuring out what to eat every day. So now that we have some ideas for those busy nights, so that you don't have to give up eating healthy just because you're rushing around, we're going to go on to what do you do if you don't have a lot of new ideas and you feel like you're always making the same foods over and over. So we can ask the other people that's eating the foods you make what they would like to eat. And it seems pretty straightforward, but sometimes people overlook it. So whether this is your roommate, a spouse, your kids, a mother-in-law, whoever it is, asking people what they would like to have for dinner is a good starting place. And obviously timing with this is really important. You don't want to ask like minutes before everyone expects to eat, because everyone will be hungry and no one will be able to decide and you won't have any time to make it. Trina suggests asking about a week in advance so you have time to shop. She says when children are involved in the planning process, they'll be more likely to eat what is prepared. Ask your children and other family members what foods they would like to eat during the week. It will also be easier to get help with the meal preparation and cleanup process if their food preferences are considered. And again, this is not just for kids, it helps with everybody, all ages. And if they're adults, you might want to ask them if they would be willing to take over cooking one day of the week, either to cook the full meal or an entree or a side or something, just to relieve some of that burden on you. And then you can expand a little bit more by asking your friends for ideas. Jill says, ask your friends to join you in a healthy recipe group. You can share recipes and periodically prepare something for each other. If you do this with work friends, you can plan a healthy lunch party every week. Everyone brings a dish to share. And this is really good because you trust and you know your friends, and if you wanted to, you could choose your group members in this recipe swap based on what you know about their cooking style and their food preferences. But if you don't want to be limited just to the people you know, you can also look online. And the internet is a great place for new ideas, but it can also get really overwhelming if you're just randomly looking at recipe after recipe after recipe. So I did a couple of these searches for you just to give an idea. The first one I searched for is healthy dinner ideas, and it returned 32 million results in 0.47 seconds. So you know it's easy and fast to find ideas. They're out there. Another one I searched for is easy dinner recipes, which returned over 45 million results. So while there's plenty of options, it's a lot of results to go through, and it might get really overwhelming. So Christine suggests to pick 2 to 3 ingredients that you have on hand and to search online for a recipe, 1 to 2 additional ingredients that you haven't cooked with before. And that mix of familiar and the unfamiliar, which we talked about before with the picky eaters, is also really helpful for when you're cooking in the kitchen because it feels less overwhelming than having all of those new ingredients that you've never worked with before, because you're still using some of the ingredients you already know. And there are several sites that let you search by ingredients that you have on hand. One of these examples is Supercook, which is supercook.com. And I recommend this is the one I use when I'm searching for recipes by ingredients, supercook.com. And it's a great way to find things to make with leftovers or leftover ingredients. Like if you bought too much spinach and you only used half the bag, then you can use spinach as your ingredient lookup and find recipes that use spinach to use up that rest of the bag. So that's a very helpful resource, supercook.com, if you wanted to check that out. And then, of course, you can also use online services like PapayaHead or others to send you a meal plan already done for you so that you have the recipes right there and you don't have to sort through all these millions of results. So if searching through your own results or searching through even like a recipe lookup like the ingredient one like I just showed you, if that's overwhelming, it might be something you want to consider where things are already done for you. Okay, so another way to add this new to familiar, going on with this theme, is to add a new taste to something that you already make. Mary says one way to keep things very easy but creative is to whip up the same meal, but to add a new flavor, new sauce, herb, or spice. And Jill says expand on your favorite recipes by taking those flavors in new directions. If your family loves tacos, search out recipes for shrimp tacos or fish tacos, taco soup, or taco salad. Love chicken parmesan? Try zucchini parmesan as a side dish or fish parmesan as a main dish. If you don't know or aren't familiar with what to change, or if you need a little bit more structure, you can also use a meal outline and customize it. And Mary suggests creating a base and just switching up the ingredients. For example, choose a bean, a grain, 3 different veggies, herbs like parsley, cilantro, basil, or whatever, avocado, olives, or nuts and seeds for healthy fats, and then different flavored dressings or sauces. And this method of flexible mix and match master planning makes it really easy to use things that you already have on hand and to adjust for flavor preferences. And if you want more examples of this, the My Plate model at choosemyplate.gov is also a really good example of an eating pattern that might be helpful to look into. So instead of a one recipe master plan, they have more of a meal master plan. And again, that's choosemyplate.gov. And all of these new meal ideas and tips become a little bit easier if you're able to make a habit out of trying new recipes. Sharon Palmer, the author of Plant Powered for Life, says if you're lacking in creativity in the kitchen, bored with your meal routine, try this strategy. One day a week, try a new recipe. Pick the easiest day of your week. For me, it's on Sunday night. Make sure to include what you need in your weekly shopping trip so you don't have to run out at the last minute to get supplies. Look for all sorts of inspiration for that new recipe. Blogs, videos, cookbooks, magazines. Then try the recipe and let everyone in your family give it the thumbs up or down. If it's a keeper, enter it into your repertoire of recipes you can recreate, and pretty soon you won't even need to look at it. You'll remember how to make it off the top of your head. When you have a collection of recipes that are easy, go-to, delicious, and popular at home, it makes your cooking and your life so much happier. And another great benefit of making this trying new things part of your routine is that it cultivates curiosity. And that brings us to the last tip in this section, which is to choose and learn about one new ingredient. Learning about new foods or ingredients after finding them at the store, the farmer's market, or seeing it mentioned in a recipe can also help spark new ideas. Sandy says, go to the grocery and pick up new foods to sample. Make a game out of trying new foods each week, learn where it came from, how it was grown, etc. The more you and the kids learn, the more apt they will be to taste and become more adventurous eaters along the way. And it's really great to make a habit of being more interested in learning about the world and the people that are around us. So to summarize, we have talked about ideas from dietitians, about feeding your picky eaters, about eating healthy meals even when you're busy, and about figuring out where to get new meal ideas throughout the week. I want to thank all the dietitians who shared their tips with us. Again, their full quotes are going to be available in the handout. I'm going to pass it back to Dean pretty soon, but if you do have any questions or comments on any of the tips, please put them in the comments in the question box, and we're going to review those and get back to you. And then the slides and all the quotes, again, they'll be available for you after the presentation, and Dean can share more about that. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions. And Dean, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Shelly. Hey, great job. This was some really, really useful information, stuff that people can use right now, today, tonight, for dinner to solve, these problems that we all face. We do have a question coming in from Benjamin, and he says, he's asking, hey, at the end of your day and you're exhausted, what do you do and how do you cook? And maybe that's directed at you, Shelly.
Yeah, so me specifically, this is where I find that leftovers or frozen leftovers are really helpful because you don't have to think about what to make. You don't have to spend a lot of time. Sometimes you just want to, the function of eating is just exhausting thinking about it. And so if you have to also add the function of cooking, that's just completely overwhelming. So just opening the refrigerator, having those leftover nights where I said, I wasn't just meaning opening the refrigerator and eating, but in this case, I find that that's the most helpful, is just to open the refrigerator or the freezer and just to get something that was previously made and ready to go. And this is kind of like refrigerator takeout instead of having to go pick up fast food somewhere, because it's the same, you save time, it takes about the same amount of time. But instead you're in your own house already, you can just put on your sweats or whatever and just relax and eat in the same amount of time that it would have taken you to pick up fast food, is just to have this thing here. If this is a chronic thing, if every day you're tired, trying to maybe think about other strategies to manage that exhaustion and the tiredness might be helpful as well as kind of a complementary strategy to figuring out the food things, because if this is a chronic problem, it might be a sign of something else that is out of balance in your life. But as far as the food part of it goes, being able to focus on what is it you can do ahead of time to make those days easy, and is there any pattern to this? Are you tired from Monday through Friday nights because that's when you work, and you're okay on the weekends, so you could batch cook on the weekends enough meals or enough of something even if it's not something that you're going to be eating on the weekend, like just to cook a couple of things ahead to put in the freezer or something in the refrigerator so that you have some of those meals planned out already so that you don't have to think about anything else. Another tip is to use some of those prepared foods, not talking about like microwave meals. I'm talking about like salad that's already cut up for you, lettuce that's already cut up for you. So you can just open the bag, pour it on a plate, put some dressing, and maybe throw in a couple of seeds or nuts. And then you have, and a boiled egg or something. There you go, all done, right? That's a dinner, that's easy. It took like a couple of minutes. So if you make boiled eggs at the beginning of the week, and you can use them throughout the week, that's a helpful thing too, because I find that that's a really good source of cheap protein. And it can go in a lot of things. I mean, eggs are very versatile. So you can use them in a salad or as a topper for something like a sandwich, things like that. Like figuring out those strategies, what can you do ahead of time, what can you do to save time, because when you're tired, those ideas are not going to come as readily, right? It's not, you're going to just be standing there like, I have nothing to eat, staring at a full refrigerator. I've done that before. So did that answer your question? Was that enough strategies? We can go into more of that if you have a specific scenario.
I think that was some great information, and Benjamin said, yeah, that answered his question. And boy, haven't we all been there, right? Just tired. It's like, oh, I don't even want to think about dinner or cooking. And, without I love that idea, Shelly, of, taking care of that when you're not so exhausted. So when you are tired and don't want to deal with it, there's something sitting there in the freezer at least you could warm up, because otherwise it's liable to be a Hot Pocket or a cardboard frozen pizza or something not so good. There's a question coming in from Larry, and Larry says he's concerned that his grandkids are vegetarians, allergic to milk, and how do we make sure we get them enough protein when they cook?
Yeah, so dairy foods are pretty common in the recommendations for people who are vegetarians but still eat dairy and eggs and fish, but it does depend on what kind of vegetarian they are. So like, do they eat fish? Do they eat eggs? Because those are also other sources of protein available to some vegetarians. Other than that, if you don't want to eat dairy or eggs or fish, you can switch to beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds, tofu or other soy products. There are a lot of other options. And if you need inspiration, good places to look, there are plenty of resources for like vegetarian cooking and the dietetics, Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is eatright.org. They have several resources on vegetarian protein, and they have recipes. They're the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, eatright.org. So they have other topics other than just vegetarian nutrition. But there are other dietetic groups that do focus on just vegetarian nutrition and dietitians who specialize all around this topic. But what I find for a lot of people, and also incorporate some of these other tips of trying new foods and exploring new recipes and learning about different cultures and places, is that globally there are many cultures that are vegetarian, and so there are recipes that are very well balanced, that have great sources of protein and have a lot of different interesting flavors. And so if you are interested in exploring new recipes and new tastes and new cultures, that might be something of interest to you, to look at recipes from around the world, vegetarian recipes from around the world, because a lot of those have adequate protein and fit the vegetarian diet restrictions. So for example, like a lot of curries can be either vegetarian or non-vegetarian. There's lots of different salads, obviously, but things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, like sometimes people think curry, it has to have chicken in it, or it has to have some kind of meat, but it doesn't have to. A lot of stir fries and a lot of different foods, like if you want to, depends on how much time you want to spend, because you can make in dumplings and stuff like that. And those don't have to have meat in them. They can have other proteins. So there are a lot of options for you, and you can, you can just explore those options.
Wow, that's an in-depth answer, Shelly. You're an amazing resource. That's pretty good. Here's another question that, it's a great idea to ask the picky eaters what they want. But what's your strategy if they ask for unhealthy food. Like I want, the Kraft mac and cheese, or I want hot dogs, or they're just asking for something. It's a little hard to make healthy. What do you do about that?
Right, and it's funny because some of the people online, they'll be like, oh, you can hide the vegetables and stuff. But kids are smart, and if you ruin their macaroni and cheese with some green stuff, like they'll notice that. That's not exactly hiding. So like Sandy had said, she had suggested incorporating other foods. So like when you do that kids day, she said if they do choose macaroni and cheese, that's fine, let them choose it, but then you're responsible for supplementing some of those other things, not mixing it in, just supplementing it so that it's available and that there are options, because again, you're not forcing those kids to eat stuff, but you're just responsible for making it available so that they have the opportunity to eat it if they choose to. And it is hard, and like I said, there are a lot of dietitians who specialize in this. I'm not one of them, but there are many, many dietitians who specialize in this. And if you are interested in looking up more tips on this, in the quotes, like I mentioned, several people had resources, or that people that we interviewed and explained their tips on this webinar. They have given tips around picky eating, and you'll see their quotes and links to their books and the links to their websites in the full quotes when we give the handout. But you can also look up dietitians through the Find an Expert tool on the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is eatright.org, and then they have a little button that says Find an Expert, and if you click that, you can search for dietitians all around the country in it's US based, but if you're interested in a particular place, or interested in a particular specialty like child nutrition, you can go there and search for that and see all the profiles and stuff like that. If you are outside of the country, then there are dietetic organizations in a lot of the major countries. I'm not sure what all of their websites are off the top of my head, but if you search for Dietitian Association and then your country, you should be able to figure that out. Also, if you're interested, sometimes the other option is to still find one of the US-based dietitians and just do like a video consultation with them, like over Skype or another platform like that. And so that is still available to people in other places that may not be living in the US. Did that answer your question?
That was great. Thank you very much, Shelly. Well, I think you've done a great job providing some doing this research, pulling all this information together, summarizing it, and presenting it in a really clear way. So the participants here, I think, have some actionable things. Again, you could go put this to use tonight. So, boy, all the participants, if you appreciated Shelly's presentation, give her a virtual round of applause by just typing in thank you or whatever your response is there in the question box, and offer her some encouragement. Let's go ahead and move. We do have an offer to help you put this information into practice. So Shelly had talked about, particularly the strategy of having ingredients on hand and having some meals already planned. So when dinner time hits, which is going to happen every single night, right? You've got the materials, you got a plan, you can just go do it even if you're exhausted. You can do it really quickly. So we've put together this resource. Shelly created it for us for PapayaHead.com, and it's called the Ultimate Pantry Guide. And it's got 50 plus foods to always have on hand. And she offers a really nice combination of non-perishable, dry goods that'll keep for a long time, and items to put in the freezer, and even in the refrigerator, some fresh vegetables, but some shopping tips and storage tips on how to make those last as long as possible so you don't get spoilage and waste. So I think it's a phenomenal resource. And in addition to the 50 plus foods to always have on hand, she's got 20 plus meal ideas of how you can use those ingredients to create meals, healthy meals, really, really quickly. Tips on how to make meals healthier, very simple steps to take. Some make-ahead ideas like, boil some pasta, have it ready to go, have some sauce ready to go, and then freeze that. And then, just like Benjamin was asking, it's like, oh, I'm exhausted. What am I going to do? I'm just going to defrost that pasta, pour that sauce on it, get one of those pre-cut salads, and in less than 2 minutes, I've got a reasonable dinner on the table. Great ideas like that. And again, shopping tips, how to make better choices, how to save money, and how to shop basically for preservation and flexibility. So it's a super guide, and it's only $4.99. So it's a really good value. And there's a URL on the screen. We made it a tiny URL, so hopefully you can see that. You can type it in. And I've also posted it into the chat area on the GoToWebinar platform there, so you can just click that link and go check it out if you're interested. And hey, you are getting a round of applause here, Shelly, from Benjamin, from Tron Derek. So they're thanking you for the presentation. Big thumbs up. Again, I think you did a great job. Thank you so much, Shelly, for doing the research, for coming and presenting, and just for your role with our company here. We feel really, really fortunate to have you involved with us. And thank you to the participants for showing up. Saturday morning, there's lots of places you could be, morning or afternoon, evening for Tron Derek. A lot of places you could be. So I hope that you found this valuable. It was worth your time. And again, if you're interested in this Ultimate Pantry Guide, you're welcome to check that out. And of course, you can go to PapayaHead.com and see what else we got going on. Well, I don't see anything else coming in, so that's it. We hope to see you at a future presentation, and take care, and thank you. All right, bye-bye. Hey, Lori, you're welcome. Thank you for showing up. All right.